How do you dress for death when you know your name will be erased by the man who once begged for your love? This isn't a story about a fallen queen, it's about the morning she walked with dignity to the place where history meant to silence her forever. May 19, 1536. A grey sky hung low over the Tower of London. In the quiet courtyard a strange scaffold had been built lower than usual. A foreign swordsman would wield his blade today, not the English axe. This was no ordinary execution. The crowd began to gather, murmuring like wine through the stone walls. Today a queen will die, they whispered. Anne, England's most controversial queen, would be the first royal woman in English history executed by law. Her name already burned with scandal inside a small prison chamber and opened her eyes. It was her 17th day in the Tower, and her last. No cries, no panic, only silence, only the weight of knowing she had dressed for her death before the world had woken. At 35 she still carried the elegance that once captivated a king. Her ladies in waiting, eyes red with sorrow, helped her dress and chose her attire carefully. A grey mantle lined with fur, and beneath a crimson bodice meant to hide blood. This choice was deliberate, practical, yes, but deeply symbolic. Even in death she would control how she was seen. Her body might fall, but her image would not break. She fastened the gown herself. Her hands did not tremble. I hear the executioners. Very good, she said softly. I have a little neck. She touched her throat, and a ghost of a smile appeared. Those nearby were stunned. This wasn't weakness, it was courage disguised as wit. Once Henry VIII had rewritten a nation's faith to make and his queen. She had refused to be his mistress. She demanded a crown, and for a time she ruled beside him. But in England, love rarely outlives politics. Outside the crowd swelled. Men removed their hats as a sign of respect or superstition. They came expecting to see fear, but what they saw was something else. A woman walking toward the scaffold like it was a throne, and somewhere across the river in Whitehall Palace the man she once enchanted was already preparing to marry again. He waited only for the thunder of the cannon, his signal that Anne Boleyn was no more. The final morning had begun. She was never supposed to be queen, not the prettiest, not the wealthiest, not even the first to catch the king's eye. But Anne Boleyn had something far more dangerous, a mind that could match a monarch, and a heart that refused to be owned. Born into the rising Boleyn family and was sent to the courts of Europe and France. She studied under queens, absorbed the arts, mastered languages, and moved through noble circles with a grace far beyond her years. The Renaissance sharpened her like a blade. When she returned to England in 1522 she didn't fit the era's ideal of beauty. Her olive skin, dark hair, and piercing black eyes defied expectations, but her presence was magnetic. Men turned to look, not because she was pretty, but because she was powerful. Court she watched her sister Mary Boleyn become the king's mistress, but Anne would not follow. She was not there to be discarded. When Henry VIII set his sights on her, she did something no other woman had dared. She said, "No, I will not be your concubine," she told the most powerful man in England. "If you want me, truly want me, you must make me your queen." It was a challenge, it was a gamble, it was the beginning of a revolution. For 7 years Henry was consumed. He fought the Pope, defied the Church, and broke with Rome, all to marry her. He made himself supreme head of the Church of England, and wasn't just a woman, she was the reason England was reborn. In January 1533 they married in secret, and was already pregnant that September she gave birth to a daughter. Not the long-awaited son but a girl too. Henry. It was a disappointment to history. It was Elizabeth Tobiah and ruled for only 3 years, but her influence was immediate. She championed religious reform, protected scholars and supported the translation of the Bible into English. Her court was filled with ideas, intellect and inspiration. She was not just a queen, she was a movement. But ambition creates enemies. Her refusal to be meek made her dangerous. The same boldness that won her a crown now began to threaten it. Her enemies whispered in corridors. Her power was admired but never forgiven. She had reached the highest peak a woman in her time could climb, but with kings love is a fleeting flame, and in a court ruled by politics, one mistake or one miscarriage was enough to send even a queen hurtling toward ruin. Gi had the crown, the king, and the power to change a nation, but in the Tudor court a queen's throne rested not on love or law but on the fragile hope of birthing a son, and hope for Anne Boleyn was running out after Elizabeth's birth and was eager to fulfill the promise of an heir. But in 1534 she miscarried. The court held its breath. In 1535 she became pregnant again, only to lose a male fetus for a king obsessed with legacy. It was a quiet catastrophe, and still moved with purpose. She promoted English Bibles, debated scholars, and remained a driving force for reform. But every sermon she approved, every bishop she supported, only intensified the resentment around her. To her enemies, she wasn't a queen, she was a heretic. Court whispers became venom. Some said she was cursed, others called her a witch. Her quick tongue and sharp mind, once adored by Henry, now grated on him. The flame of obsession had cooled and was no longer his muse, she was his problem. Henry began drifting from her. He spent more time with Jane Seymour, a gentle, quiet lady in waiting who seemed everything and was not, and sensing the shift tried to hold her place. But the harder she tried, the more isolated she became. Behind the scenes her enemies moved like wolves, chief among them Thomas Cromwell, once her ally, now her executioner in disguise. He knew and had lost the king's favor. All that remained was to make her fall look righteous and legal. In April 1536 the first rumors began: adultery, conspiracy, treason. It was laughable yet lethal. 5 men were named, including her own brother George. The charges were wild, but the trial wouldn't need truth, it only needed a crown that wanted her gone, and was arrested and sent back to the Tower, the same place where 3 years earlier she had celebrated her coronation. This time there were no trumpets, no garlands, just walls, just silence, just the sound of power closing in. Even as her world collapsed and remained composed, she defended herself in court with such clarity that witnesses compared her to an angel. But this was not a court seeking justice, it was a theater with a death sentence already written, and was found guilty, the punishment burning. But the king showed her one final mercy. He ordered that she be beheaded instead by a sword, not an axe. The queen who once demanded a crown would now lose her head. She stood at the center of power, then watched the walls close in the Tudor court. Downfall never came suddenly, it arrived slowly, with a smile and a dagger hidden beneath a judge's robe. For Anne Boleyn the fall was already scripted. It began in whispers sharpened by betrayal, as Thomas Cromwell, the king's calculating minister, turned against her. And though once allies in reform, they now stood on opposite sides of the throne, with Cromwell playing the long game with perfect cruel. On May 2, 1536, and was arrested midday at Greenwich. And she didn't scream or faint instead. Boarding the royal barge back to the tower where she had once arrived as queen in waiting, but this journey felt colder. Final different inside the charges were: read adultery with 5 men including her brother George, Berlin conspiracy against the king, and treason, each accusation more outrageous than the last. But logic had no place in a trial born from politics, not truth. The trial on May 15th was swift and brutal, with Anne given no lawyer, no defense, and a jury filled with men who wanted her gone, while the evidence was hearsay, gossip, and invented timelines, and the outcome already carved in stone yet, and did not beg. And she stood with calm that disarmed her enemies, speaking so wisely and discreetly that witnesses said she seemed not a woman but something above human, like an angel. One man said, but angels don't win in courts ruled by kings. Anne was found guilty, sentenced to be burned, the traditional fate for female traitors. Ironic for England's great reformer, now condemned by the laws of the old faith she had helped unravel. Then came a shift. Henry issued mercy in his theatrical style, ordering her beheaded instead, not by English axe but by French sword, sending for a skilled executioner, as if speed and precision could cover up political murder, and the choice was image, a clean death, a foreign blade, less blood, less spectacle, a way to silence and without stirring rebellion. For Henry wanted it over quickly, because in 10 days he intended to marry again, and waited in the tower as days dripped like wax from a candle, and she prayed, wrote, and faced the silence, while outside England held its breath, knowing this was not justice but the unmaking of a queen. Piece by piece, what does it feel like to count the final hours of your life, not metaphorically but literally, to watch the sun rise, knowing it will set without you? For on May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn didn't just walk to her death, she walked into legend. She woke early, dressed, prayed, and steeled her spirit for an execution scheduled at dawn, only to be told it was delayed until noon, not for mercy but logistics, as the crowd and swordsmen weren't ready, and then would have to wait. She spent the hours in prayer, took communion, and between whispered verses she paused, often repeating, Lord, have mercy on me, before swearing upon the sacred host. For my salvation I am innocent of the things for which I was condemned. At last the drums began to beat, and Anne gave each of her loyal ladies a parting gift, a prayer book, a jewel, a handkerchief, simple objects now sacred, saying, remember me and how I end before stepping out into history. Around 1,000 people had gathered, less than expected. But the air was different, not bloodthirsty or mocking but almost reverent, as the crowd removed their hats and then appeared, walking with quiet dignity, in gray and crimson, given permission to speak, and turned to the crowd and said, I come here to die. According to the law I accuse no one. I pray God save the king, for to me he was ever a gentle and sovereign lord. She didn't plead or proclaim innocence, she played her final card, loyalty, and by saying nothing against Henry she protected the one thing that still mattered to her, her daughter Elizabeth's future. She removed her mantle and hood, her hair pinned up and neck exposed, and gave the executioner a purse of gold as payment for a swift, clean death. There was no block sword executions required. Upright, kneeling, Anne knelt unshaking. A lady tied the blindfold over her eyes and then whispered, Jesus, receive my soul, O Lord God, have pity on my soul. And by tradition the executioner called out, where is my sword, causing Anne to turn slightly. And the blade struck one blow clean and final, and he lifted her head by the hair and proclaimed, "So perish the king's enemies." But the crowd didn't cheer. There was only a hush, a ripple of unease. And then the cannons fired the signal to Henry that Anne Boleyn was gone. She was born to be remembered, yet buried like she never mattered, with no tomb, no stone, no crown, only a wooden box in silence. For after her death Anne Boleyn's body was not the only thing buried, so was her name. When the crowd dispersed, Anne's ladies gathered what remained, her body and her head, but no coffin had been prepared, and there was no royal burial, no procession, just the stillness of shock and guards eager to be done. They found an old chest, a common arrow box, rough and empty, and into it they placed her body and her severed head beside it. So the Queen of England was crammed into a box meant for weapons. She was taken to the nearby chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Inside the tower, no music, no prayers, and Anne Boleyn, once the center of an empire, was lowered into a shallow grave without a name. But death wasn't enough for Henry. He wanted her erased, so he ordered all portraits of Anne destroyed, her symbols carved off palace walls, and her name struck from royal records as if she had never existed. This was no ordinary punishment. It was a Roman one, called damnatio memoriali, the destruction of memory, not just to kill the person but to wipe out the idea of them, to bury them not only in earth but in time. It worked for centuries. No authenticated portrait of Anne survived, and her story, once thunderous, became a whisper, a footnote in the very history she helped create. The woman who inspired a king to split a church was now a ghost. No one spoke her name at court, and her enemies ensured it echoed only in shame. But even the most thorough eraser cannot last forever, for legends find a way to breathe again, especially those whose stories were stolen and memories slept beneath cold stone. But it was not gone, not truly, and soon her legacy would rise, not through monument or crown, but through a daughter. He erased her from paintings, from prayers, from memory, but Anne Boleyn left behind something the axe couldn't touch. A child, a girl born in disappointment, raised in shadow, and destined to become the most powerful queen England would ever know. In 1558, 23 years after Anne's execution, Elizabeth I took the throne. Not meant to rule, not even expected to survive, but she rose quietly and completely into power, a daughter made of fire and restraint. Elizabeth didn't speak much of her mother, but she wore Anne's emblem. The white falcon brought reformers into her court and revived Anne's vision of a learned Protestant England. In silence she honored the woman the world had tried to forget. Elizabeth knew what her mother's downfall had cost. She had seen what love did to queens and would not repeat the mistake, so she chose a different path, declaring, "I am married to England," and she meant it. She never wed, never risked being overruled or reduced. Wherein had gambled everything on a king's devotion. Elizabeth bet on herself, and won. Her reign lasted 45 years, a time of art, science, exploration, and national pride, and under her England flourished into a golden age with Anne Boleyn's blood running through its very heart. Henry had tried to erase Anne, but Elizabeth ensured she would never be forgotten, not with monuments but with strength, with law, with a crown held firm by a woman's hand, and spirit echoed in her daughter's court. In every scholar protected, every priest questioned, every law rewritten, and Elizabeth didn't need to avenge, and with words for her very survival was enough. They called her the Virgin queen, but in truth she was the queen of survival, a living legacy of a mother silenced and a daughter who would never kneel through Elizabeth and triumph not with armies or revenge but with endurance, for a woman erased became the mother of England's greatest monarch. And though the axe had fallen, the crown endured. She was buried without a name, forgotten, lost, but history, like truth, has a way of rising even through stone. And centuries later someone would find her not in pages of glory but beneath the chapel floor in 1876 during renovations at the chapel of St. Peter. Advincula bones were uncovered, including a female skeleton with delicate limbs and a small skull believed to be Anne Boleyn. So after more than 300 years she was found. Her remains were rearied with dignity, this time with prayers, with a name and a quiet acknowledgement that a wrong had been done. Today a simple glass panel marks the spot where Anne Boleyn was executed. No statue, no throne, just a patch of lawn inside the tower, where each May 19th admirers lay roses in silence. Not all remember her as a queen, some remember her as a victim, others as a visionary, but to many she represents something more: the cost of being a woman who dared to rise too high. She was punished for ambition, for intelligence, for refusing to be someone's mistress, for asking for a crown and getting it, but her final revenge was never loud. It was Elizabeth, a queen born from scandal, who ruled without apology, a woman who turned her mother's ashes into golden legacy, and death was meant to erase her, but the child she left behind ensured her memory bloomed again, not with fury but with rule, with power held gently but firmly in a woman's hands. She was silenced but never defeated, forgotten but never truly gone. Today her story is not one of tragedy but of endurance, for Anne Boleyn walked into death alone and walked out through history with a crown that no blade could